Started. So welcome everyone. I'm Abby King, your host today. And it's so nice to have you all here with us for today's Art at Noon, the Ladies of the Red Rose in Cogslea. And to start, I wanted to respectfully acknowledge that our institutional host, the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, is on the ancestral lands of the Lenape people, whose presence and resilience in Pennsylvania continues to this day. I also wanted to thank the folks who make programs like this possible. The Spring's Art at Noon lectures are supported by the Lefko family in memory of a beloved member of the docent corps, Mildred T. Lefko. Thank you to the Lefkos for helping us have free programs like this for years. And I want to just mention a few things for anyone who's just now joining us for Art at Noon. We are recording today's program, so if you know of anyone who couldn't be here today, know that that will be on PAFA's YouTube channel later this afternoon. Our hour program, we have about 45 minutes with Dr. Ricci, our speaker, and then we will have time at the end for questions. So feel free to drop things in the chat as we go and know that we'll address those at the end. We'd love to hear from you, so please put in resources, questions, what have you in the chat. And I also have to mention that many of the artists that you're going to hear about today are on view as a part of PAFA's ongoing exhibition, Women in Motion, 150 Years of Women's Artistic Networks at PAFA, which is curated by Dr. Anna O'Marley, which we're so blessed to have her here with us today, Anna. So if you haven't already seen that show, or if you want to see it again after hearing the presentation, please make sure to see that in person before it comes down July 15th. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Patricia Ricci, professor of the history of art at Elizabethtown College, was educated at two pioneering colleges for women, Bryn Mawr College and Moore College of Art and Design. Her research focuses on the emergence of professional women artists in Philadelphia at the turn of the 20th century, including Violet Oakley, Jessie Willcox Smith, Elizabeth Shippen Green, Emily Sartain, and the artist of the Plastic Club, which I just saw some hellos from the Plastic Club in the chat. So welcome, Plastic Club members. She is a recognized authority on Violet Oakley and was the guest curator of the retrospective exhibition, A Grand Vision, Violet Oakley and the American Renaissance at the Woodmere Art Museum in 2017 to 2018. So please, everyone, join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Ricci. We're so happy to have you.
Well, thank you so much for that nice introduction. And let's see. Should we get started?
That sounds great.
Okay. Can everyone see that? Are we good to go?
Looks great.
Okay. How's the sound? I have our technical check here.
You sound wonderful. That.
Okay, well, let me know if anything gets glitchy. So, the Ladies of the Red Rose and Cogslea is our subject today. And let's take a look at them. Let's meet them. And of course, now we are having a little technical something. Wouldn't you know it? There we go. Jessie Willcox Smith, Elizabeth Shippen Green, and Violet Oakley. Now, in the first 2 decades of the 20th century, these women became famous and financially independent artists, fully integrated into male-dominated fields of art. Now, how did they do this? How did they achieve this status? Not through the usual channels. They did not inherit money. They did not marry into money or marry at all in some cases, or may marry for a network into the profession, which was one of the ways that people traditionally, women in particular, were able to have an entree into a male-dominated field. But they succeeded by really a kind of anticipated field of branding and marketing themselves, something which is very much like what people do today. And what they were able to do is create a cooperative household, not simply to pool their resources, but what they did very cleverly is understand what the barriers were for women in getting into these fields and to mirror what people expected of them. And in that way, they seemed to meet everybody's expectations. It was a kind of extraordinary insight that we're used to today, where people fashion themselves in order to get a response. But it was particularly unusual at the time. One reason was because of these gender differences that were so rigid. Today, of course, we're in gender fluid world. This is a biological determinism, and it really worked against women in all fields of higher education or in the professions. And the way it worked was this, that women were naturally designed for domesticity. They were in childbearing and marriage, and they might choose not to do that or be unable to achieve that, but that's what they were designed for. Anything that they chose to do should reflect femininity, because if they didn't reflect that, then they were a defective woman, or they had been desexed was the word. The same applied for men. Of course, the term then was effeminate. And what this meant was that there were separate spheres, it was the term, separate spheres of activity for men and women, things that were appropriate and things that were not. And you had even men like Charles Eliot Norton, who would become, he was a professor of art at Harvard, he would become the president of Harvard, saying that at a Bryn Mawr graduation in 1896, that women were not creative or inventive, that women's highest capacity would be to praise creative people or to nurture them. So there really wasn't much point in trying to do anything that would advance your career as an artist. The other thing was that these terms, masculine and feminine, were aesthetic terms as well. If women's art was effeminate, that was what it should be. However, that was certainly going to be weaker than men's art, which should be virile. And therefore, if you succeeded as a woman, you could only succeed by being weaker than men. So there was actually a double bind in which women really couldn't achieve anything. They could either act like men and therefore be considered deviant, or they could be, true women and be inferior. Those were the options. And our three women here managed to find a way to have careers in spite of that. Now, at this point, we're looking here at Winslow Homer's famous drawing of the art students and copyists in the Louvre Gallery, and being a journalistic artist, he kind of always had his eye on change, social change. And you see that he foregrounds the women who are now showing up in the Louvre and wanting to paint on large canvases as well. And this is kind of the beginning of women, especially women who have money and can travel, educating themselves. They can't go to the École des Beaux-Arts, they're not permitted. The academy is in Pennsylvania is still somewhat limited, but there they are showing up and kind of pushing themselves into the field. So these are the kind of the warning signs that women are going to be looking to work as artists. The other field that women could go into was teaching, and this had been dominated by men. And very often when a field is dominated by men and women enter it, then the men will leave. But teaching was considered appropriate for women with young children because that was a natural kind of maternal instinct. It was assumed that every woman would have. The other field after the Civil War was nursing, but that was not really professionalized for a while. And of course, we know Thomas Aiken's two famous paintings, the Gross Clinic, and then by the time you have to get up to the Agnew Clinic before you really see women as professional nurses. Now, Jessie Willcox Smith has no art background and does not come from a family of artists. She comes from an affluent family in Philadelphia, at least initially. Her father was an investment banker, and she was the youngest of about 5 children. And she was interested in becoming a teacher. She didn't need to do that, so we can assume her parents thought that work profession for women was a good idea. And she goes to Cincinnati, which was actually, the Midwest was quite progressive at that time, where they are training people for this new approach to childhood education coming from Germany called the kindergarten, which is the discovery that very young children can learn. And she decides that's what she'd like to do. She decides she'd like to do that. She gets some training for a few, not even a year, I think, and they let her loose in the classroom. And as Jessie put it, she was too tall. She was simply too tall for children this size. But whatever it was, bending down and dealing with these children did not appeal to her after a short amount of time, but the children themselves did. And she decided that she would draw them. And this, of course, is going to be her chief subject matter. And that early experience as a kindergarten teacher really informs everything that she does. Her children's behaviors are very authentic, and she also emphasizes education, as you see here, even in a big range from the beginning of the century until here, this good housekeeping in the 20s. So she comes back to Philadelphia and goes to the Philadelphia School of Design for Women. Now, this was an art school started in 1850 by Sarah Peter, who made the case that it was preposterous to think all women were going to get married and have someone support them, or that their families would be able to support them, or that they shouldn't have meaningful work. And she advocated with the trustees of the Franklin Institute to start a design school to train women to work in industry, to work as textile designers, wallpaper designers, wood engravers. And there was a certain amount of fine arts training. William Sartain of the famous Sartain family, he taught there. And later on, his sister, Emily, would become the director of it. So Jessie Willcox Smith does that for about maybe a semester, 1885. And then she realizes, of course, that where she wants to be is the academy, the status of artists who are working commercially and those who are expressing themselves in a fine arts mode. Is the resolution okay? We were having some, are we good?
It looks
Can
great.
we go here? Okay, I seem to get a little message. Now the Academy has been slowly letting women participate more fully, and the ultimate class for women to participate in would be the life class. And Alice Barber Stevens, who once women were fully admitted to the Academy in 1876, she attended and she recorded, well, documented here, the life class when in 1879, when women were finally being allowed to draw from the nude model, something that even many women did not want to do. But of course, women could only draw nude women, where men could draw men, I believe, and women. And Akins, of course, thought this was idiotic. He didn't like the idea of women in school to begin with. And one reason was so many of them were so squeamish. And he said, oh, I guess if we do animals, the women should paint the cows and the men should paint the bulls. And at any rate, Jessie Willcox Smith attended his classes in 1885, and she described him as a madman. Brilliant, but volatile and kind of disruptive and very demanding of the women. And I love this photograph of him because he just looks so mischievous, which he have that streak. So he wasn't all that helpful to her. She admired him, but he was a little rattling. And many women found him that way. Eventually, they're the ones who will be his undoing. Now, Elizabeth Shippen Green has a different experience. She is an illustrator's daughter, and her father was Jasper Green, who worked for Harper's as a Civil War artist, doing primarily battles. And you see here her portrait of him. And this illustration she did for Harper's probably reflects on her own experience as a child. She was an only child, and he trained her initially. And you see this little girl here who looks similar to, as the coloring of Elizabeth Shippen Green, kind of working on her first art projects. So she was a kind of quick study and precocious, and she was able to start selling illustrations when she was just 18 years old. And I guess we can assume her father's network must have helped her a little bit, but of course you can see from the difference in their styles, she's not really imitating him. And besides, the world of the magazines is changing at this time too. Now enter Violet Oakley, entirely different, not from Philadelphia. The family is from New York and also New England. She grows up in the North Jersey suburbs, which is where you moved when you made some money. And she comes from an extended family of artists on both sides. William Swain, a New England portrait painter, and George Oakley, who was an English, kind of an Anglo-American artist who painted different kinds of genre subjects. And one of the more famous people in the family, you see there is Octavius Oakley, her great uncle, who was in the Royal Watercolor Society. That's an example of his work. There were a lot of women in the family who were trained to be artists. So it was a very supportive environment for a fine artist. And Oakley's father worked on Wall Street. And up until the Panic of 1893, they were doing really quite well. They weren't really, Gilded Age rich, but they were comfortable. She was the youngest of three daughters. The first had died of diphtheria. Her sister Hester went to Vassar. And in 1895, the women are taken to Europe to have their Parisian experience. And it's there in the atelier of Edmond Amanjan that Violet Oakley has her Japanese moment here and makes this painting, Lady with a Fan. So she is kind of headed for a career, she believes, as a painter. Well, life doesn't always work out that way. And the Panic of 93, it took a few years, like the Depression, to kick in, and it completely wiped out the Oakleys' finances. And Violet Oakley's father was one of the people who suffered from neurasthenia and had a complete nervous breakdown. This leaves the women in the family without much income. And what they decide to do is come to Philadelphia, because Philadelphia is considered the cutting edge medical center. And Dr. Weir Mitchell is working on various kinds of techniques for people who have psychological problems. So they end up selling their house and moving to Philadelphia. And now Violet Oakley, after having this kind of sophisticated experience, is living with her mother in boarding houses in Powelton Village. And the father does not get better. He ends up being in the Friends Hospital for the Insane. Now, I don't know how you make new friends when in this kind of atmosphere, but she goes to the academy and people say, what does your father do? Or, what brings you here? I would think it would take tremendous poise and self-control to be able to, especially in the kind of rigid social of that time, to be able to adjust to that, even telling people she lives in boarding house. But the Oakleys really became desperate for money in a very short time. And what they decided was that although Violet Oakley was enjoying her class, especially with Cecilia Bow, that she simply could not afford the tuition, and that she should try to be an illustrator and make money that way. Now, for Violet Oakley, this is really a step down. To illustrate, to make things that of other people's ideas for them, and then have to go to New York or go to Boston and hope someone will buy it or do the work they want you to do. This is very disturbing to her. She feels a loss of status in changing the direction. But then there's Howard Pyle, and everyone knows him because he is he's the old master of the illustration. He's the most painterly of the illustrators, and he dislikes this low status that is associated with illustration now that there's more commercial venues for artists. And he is determined to raise the status of illustration by offering a class at Drexel Institute for a select group of students who are talented, and they are going to become the golden age of American illustration. Maxfield Parrish and N.C. Wyeth and our three artists as well, and so many others who went through that. He was able to turn them all into stars and also make it possible for them to get respect as painters. And Pyle had a great range of styles and imagination. And basically, he draws on the history of art, Romanticism, medieval art, the pre-Raphaelites, medieval calligraphic traditions, and tells them all of this is available to you. And he encourages them to paint actual paintings for their illustrations and not just, kind of little inexpensive work, so that they have a body of work that they could show. And his range is just tremendous. And it's in that class that Violet Oakley and Jessie Willcox Smith and Elizabeth Shippen Green will all meet. And Pyle is very important here as the catalyst for sort of understanding their situation, which is a combination of need for financial support and also the desire to be artists. And he tells them to collaborate and gets them jobs. And he combined Jessie Willcox Smith, who was the older, like the big sister in the group, with Violet Oakley, and got them a paid commission to do a new illustrated version of Evangeline, which you can see here. There's still a few copies of these kind of knocking around. And they both did, they split the illustrations, and then he wrote a little tribute to them within the book. And in this way, kind of launched their careers. He also encouraged, here you see Elizabeth Shippen Green and Jessie Willcox Smith to work together as well. And they were able to kind of follow a route that Mary Cassatt had already kind of paved for herself. As an unmarried woman without children, but having access to other women with their children, and kind of capitalizing on the idea that it's expected that you understand a child's world and you understand maternal behavior. Now, they might understand it like anthropologists, because it's certainly not their own world. But the two of them would really become successful in making these images of children. And this was sold tremendously well. They did this for a couple of years, these calendars. Well, by then they need a little more space to work. And what they decide is, okay, we're working together now. Why don't we get a studio? Violet Oakley's already working at 1523 Chestnut Street. And there are other artists in and out there, and they decide, well, let's share rooms. Then we have something like an apartment where we can live and work. Elizabeth Shippen Green was apparently working out of the bedroom, without much space. And so here you can see them in what is really just a candid shot, the three of them. That's Elizabeth, she's the little one there on the left. Jessie, you can see, is tall, and you see Violet Oakley kind of leaning in here. as they kind of set up their studio. Now, if you look at Violet Oakley's little kind of nook within this, you can see Raphael, Sistine, Madonna over the fireplace and all the framed watercolors and pictures. And you see the way that she's dressed. She's certainly posed herself as a very respectable upper class lady. And she does have an illustration, but she's kind of hiding it here under maybe it was an accident, but it looks like for this photograph, she doesn't want to advertise that too much. But she's always doing something unique here for this Lotus Library publisher. She's doing something Egyptian, which was kind of interesting at the time. And notice her dark dress and how sad she looks. Violet Oakley's father is not getting better. The money is being drained, and he's going to die soon. And she's not sure what that means for her and her mother. And Violet Oakley does have a great range from all her early experiences, traveling, seeing a lot of art that she copied from old masters. But she's also becoming religious. That's all that's kind of left to her now. And medicine is failing her, and she's going to become involved with Christian Science, much to the horror of many of her family members. Now that medicine, many people, they have developed, some techniques that work. They're working on antibiotics. But Christian Science is considered to be a kind of dangerous cult. And that is going to become an issue with her and her friends. But the other thing that will come from this here, and you see her Christmas covers, is that as she does religious subjects, she simulates stained glass because she's hoping that she will be able to get a commission for a church. And this way, she could get a large sum of money, $20,000, let's say, for a long-term project and not have to do piecework all the time. She could still knock out some illustrations, but she really wants more ambitious projects, and she really needs a different level of income because she's supporting her mother. This magnificent commission she did, it really was stunning. This is not a wonderful photograph, but it's all that's left of All Angels Episcopal Church. I actually did get to see it, and then it was sold the church was sold in the late 70s. And they sold the murals, which she also painted. And then when they tried to remove them, they ripped them. And so the entire thing was destroyed. But the resurrection that you see there in the center was also a mosaic. So this is going to establish a kind of career for her as a designer. Now, meanwhile, Jessie Willcox Smith and Elizabeth Shippen Green want to continue to work the feminine angle and to, in a way, kind of promote women's education here at Bryn Mawr College. These were established institutions. Violet Oakley's sister, of course, had gone to Vassar, and also to find work there where they could kind of be the spokespersons and represent these women, much the same way that Charles Dana Gibson creates the Gibson girl. This is a kind of seductive debutante. They want to promote these women. And so here they do calendars showing the Bryn Mawr girls and also Bryn Martyrs, as we were called. Also, they have an ulterior motive in going there, which is that it is unbearably hot at 1523 Chestnut Street when you're wearing a dress that comes from your collarbones to your wrists to your ankles. And they are really just, all of us know what Philadelphia is like in the summer, even now. But it was really unbearable. So they decide that they will ask M. Carrie Thomas out there if they can stay in Bryn Mawr in the summer months and work on these projects for them. And what they're also doing is trying to scope out a new place to live and seeing if they can find some place to rent. And they will find it. Their timing is going to be very good because this property, which was the Red Rose Inn and part of an estate, this is just the inn part that we see here in this old photograph in Villanova, had been rented by the illustrator A.B. Frost, you might know, the Brer Rabbit and the Tar Baby. Today, very politically incorrect and downright racist cartoonish images that were nevertheless very popular in their day. But he had vacated the premises and they heard about this and they decided they would rent it. It became available to them. And this is how they end up being called the Red Rose Girls. There are several buildings on this property. The inn part is where they would live, but there were a lot of outbuildings that were like, barns and storage buildings. And this now will become studios for the group in them. And they decide they're going to move there with the relatives. Violet Oakley has her mother in tow. Elizabeth Shippen Green has both parents. Jessie is kind of free and clear, and they need another person. So they bring in this Henrietta Cousins, who is a kind of a gardener interested in horticulture and a friend actually of Elizabeth Shippen Green. And then they market this idea. The Plastic Club has been founded in 1897. Alice Barber Stevens was one of the moving forces. So was Emily Sartain, who organized all the aspiring women artists, including our three. And they got about 50 people together and decided that the men were not the only ones to have a club in Philadelphia, and that they needed a kind of a organization for networking. And let me put in a plug for the Plastic Club, which will celebrate its 125th anniversary this year in May. And it's an incredible achievement that it's been going strong. And even through COVID, nothing can kind of stop it. And so these women decide they want to have a group exhibition there. And there you see the post that Violet Oakley makes and them kind of fooling around here, holding their smocks, while Henrietta Cousins, who's going to be their gardener here, is actually watering them. This is how they end up being called by Howard Pyle, the Red Rose Girls. But other people will be calling them the ladies of the Red Rose, since women had picked up that girl might be affectionate, especially with someone who did care about them like Howard Pyle, but it also had a demeaning quality as well. Well, Violet Oakley just adored the Red Rose. She wrote a little biographical piece called The Romance of the Red Rose, and what just a perfect spot. And it was the happiest, time in her life. And here you can see one of her paintings of the building and various other scenes that they made. But this turned out to be a brilliant idea, because I don't know whether people followed them, what they were doing after they had the art show, which was before they moved in. That was in February. This is in March. But now they have the attention of the press, and the press will start following them. What are these women doing? This is an unusual arrangement. And you see here in 1902, when they move in, where the writer says they form a unique and interesting group, those three gifted American women, sympathetic in tastes and in ideals, living off by themselves. Well, they weren't really, but it did look that way. Amid the quaint surroundings of a bygone day, they formed to a strong force in modern illustrating, ranking with the best of those who have given, Philadelphia such an impetus in the art world. So they have figured out how to market themselves in a way that makes them romantic, makes them completely acceptable, misrepresents them just slightly, that they look like they're kind of on their own, and yet entirely respectable, not bohemian, Americans didn't, Bohemian was French decadence, and they much preferred and followed the English model of respectability. And women who worked for money and were not completely above board in respectability, could become, subjects of gossip. So they are really off and running. And now they will begin to promote themselves in their illustration, since they have the attention of the public. Here they have someone taking this photograph for them. You can see how they're identified. And Violet Oakley has done this for a Collier's Illustrated Weekly cover in June. So as soon as they get into onto the property and they start getting attention, they really work this as much as they can. So there they are, toasted with milk. You can see how they've been transformed into this illustration. And Elizabeth Shippen Green makes a version of them all frolicking for an article that she's able to get published about the red rose. And it's called Life Was Made for Love and Cheer. This is now in 1904, and it shows kind of the front lawn there and a party with the kind of children that she and Jessie are painting all the time. And this is the aura that they want to create in this world. This keeps them from being spinsters, undesirable women without any partners, maybe women who prefer other women, all the things that ordinarily might not work to their advantage or make them objects of gossip. They are now being seen through their media. They are mediating their own identities and reputations, and the public is and the publishers are eating it up, because women want to dress like them and live in these kind of places. It's just perfect. So here's another one article after another. And I don't know if they're just generating it themselves or through the publications, or the writers are looking for something to say. So here is the Red Rose. This is May 1903. So we're going into a couple years now of the press doing regular articles on them. And this is a review of current literature, the Red Rose, and it has pictures of them, and they're posed throughout. I wish I could show you all of them. They're lounging in the sun. They're standing in doorways, gazing onto the gardens, and they really are kind of working this whole image, and they just have everybody, enthralled with what they're doing. Well, it's certainly going to work to Violet Oakley's advantage because of her work in the church. She's going to attract the attention of Joseph Houston at the Pennsylvania State Capitol. And he has decided that why shouldn't she have a chance to do one of the new rooms in the Capitol? And he will give her the governor's reception room, which you see here, where she will do the life of William Penn in a series of what are basically oil paintings attached to the wall in a frieze above this, in a kind of Tudor revival room. And this is just the kind of thing that Oakley kind of saves them, because she will get paid $20,000 to do this. And part of that money will, of course, be advanced to her. Here would be one of her examples, this kind of ballet, like theatrical imagery that she creates. Now, Violet Oakley, as soon as she gets money, will go to Europe and try to live like the other mural painters, like Edwin Abbey, like John Singer Sargent, and visit all of the right places. She'll study her subject matter, but she'll use up a lot of money. And one of the issues that will start to be a factor in the way the women relate to each other is Violet Oakley doesn't quite pay her fair share on time. And Jess, it's always, we know from her letters, it's like, oh, Jessie, can you cover me this month? And Jessie, can you cover me? And I'll get back to you with that. And this apparently is a pattern, because so many years later, when I read her letters to Edith Emerson, she is saying, oh, Edith, and you pay for that insurance right now. So Violet Oakley had a kind of sense of entitlement about her important work. She really felt what she was doing. She had a mission. She was spreading important ideals. And it was all well and good that her friends made lovely illustrations, but she had a higher purpose. But by this point, these women have succeeded brilliantly. Elizabeth Shippen Green becomes the first staff artist ever for Harper's Publishers. And that means that she has an incredible kind of job security that she can count on. And you can see by her beautiful images here, she kind of moves on from the mothers and children to these kind of romantic love affairs, courtly love. And there you can see a kind of tales from Shakespeare, something that Edwin Abbey, who was a staff artist, did as well. And a brilliant style coming out of Pyle's background. Jessie will continue with her kind of development of these kindergarten age children with just the kind of image that mothers, especially affluent women, wanted to have of themselves and of their children. The child in the garden. Here's an example of this. She did these kind of over and over, reading the children kind of roaming in the flowers, taking them up to bed, all of these things that made you think she had, half a dozen children of her own. But she also was put under an exclusive contract with Collier's publisher in 1905. And then she did about 60 books. She did all the children's classics, Child's Garden of Verses, Little Red Riding Hood, Kingsley Water Babies, Little Women, There's Just No End to Them, Mother Goose. And these are all being reprinted. They've never gone out of print, and that way they're like an NCY. Very ingenious composition that she would have. People love her work. Posters, note cards. Jessie is perennially famous. But all good things must come to an end. And the Drexel family, Anthony Drexel, bought the Red Rose Inn and basically told them to get out, that he had other plans for the building. And he, I guess, was less impressed than many other people were with this great kind of lifestyle that they had there. And they were heartbroken. And now they needed another place to live. And they were acquainted with the Woodward family in Chestnut Hill, Dr. George Woodward, who was developing the suburbs up there in what is Chestnut Hill. And he had a piece of land with an old broken down colonial farm on it, which was called Hill Farm. And it had a house in disrepair. And to the left there, down the slope, you see there's a barn, and it's right above the Gresham Creek. And he knew Frank Miles Day, the architect who was interested in colonial revival, who was working on actually Independence Hall, which had kind of been neglected. And they offered to fix the place up for them and rent it. And this is what Frank Miles Day did. So they produce a colonial revival house, which is pretty much what it was, just kind of modernize it. And the whole back of it kind of is a kind of a soft precipice into the Gresham Creek. So it's all very wooded. And then there is the barn that would be remade for studio space. Violet Oakley tends to be since she likes to draw people and portraits, she left lots of sketches of all of them during this period. And so we see here Elizabeth, Henrietta, and Jessie. This is not quite finished. A lot of her work was just kind of sketched like this while they were hanging around. But again, you see them in their elegant dresses and their beautiful wallpaper and chintz cushions and things, which is how they very much wanted to appear as proper, elegant ladies, and not as people would have charcoal or paint under their nails. Well, here is the converted barn, which was not this big at the beginning, but had the roof raised several times to accommodate Violet Oakley's work. But here they could work in the barn and keep the house clean. And also they did have the elderly people with them who would also continue to live with them in the house. The gardens were designed for them as well, kind of imitating some of the features that they had at the Red Rose. Another little sketch by Violet here. They had a big dog named Prince, who you see in various pictures here, and a veranda. It's Violet Oakley, and I don't know exactly who she's sitting with there. And there you can see that might be her. It might be a guest with the dog looking into the Gresham Valley there. Now, they moved there in 1906, so they were able to make a pretty quick transition. And around that time, the Woodwards met Eugene Elliott, who was an architect, and they introduced him to the ladies of the Red Rose, who are now the ladies of Cogslea, which they're calling a building after the initials of their last name. Is kind of a joke, and also the idea of cogs and wheel. And he apparently takes a liking to Elizabeth Shippen Green. And Edith Emerson, who I knew towards the end of her life and had various stories that were told, said to me, well, Violet always said he was really intended for her because she was the youngest. And Elizabeth Shippen Green was a little older than he was. So I don't know how interested Violet Oakley was in him for herself, but she was definitely competitive. At any rate, he had quite a nice resume there. And Elizabeth Shippen Green did want to marry him, but she did not want to abandon her parents. And, he was working in New England. So the idea was that they would wait. They would wait until they passed away. Now, Elizabeth Shippen Green did a lot of work that shows that she was interested in the subject matter of men and women, like Perdita's lovers that you see here, a lot of these kind of romantic scenes. Here's another one. These are done after she meets him. And so the question becomes about our ladies of the Red Rose. What is their sexual orientation? What is their involvement with each other? And Alice Carter's book, The Red Rose Girls, documents romantic and erotic feelings between Jessie Willcox Smith and Henrietta Cousins, who did not know each other before they met at the Red Rose, but who were both older and who will develop a lifelong relationship. But it doesn't follow that Violet Oakley and Elizabeth Shippen Green also had a relationship of that kind, and not only because Elizabeth Shippen Green doesn't seem particularly interested, but also because there are lots of letters that show that she did not like Violet Oakley. She tolerated Violet Oakley, but she really did not like her. She did not like that she thought that her work was more important than illustration. That was a kind of insult to both her and her father's profession. And she didn't like that Violet Oakley proselytized about Christian Science, which is something Christian scientists don't do. And you know about that religion, they have reading rooms. Christian Science is a religion that you participate in through contemplation and study of scripture, and not through trying to convince your friends that they should agree with your beliefs. So they mocked her in letters that are in our college that anybody can read. Elizabeth Shippen Green called her science, for one thing. They referred to her as science, and then they would write back and forth, Jessie Willcox Smith too, well, she's certainly not the woman's home companion. And in various ways, they found her to be kind of pretentious and entitled, which seemed entirely justified. So I truly doubt that there was any kind of love affair between the two of them. But this is an article that has been interpreted various ways. When Jasper Green is the last of the Elizabeth Shippen Green's family to die in 1910, they decide that they will get married, she and Eugene Elliott. She writes to Violet Oakley to tell her Violet Oakley is in Europe. She writes back and says, I understand completely. It's fine. The issue is about the finances, how they will manage it, but it's going to be fine. Well, let me see if I have the wedding here. Here we have a picture of these two when they do get married, and you'll notice they do not look very joyous. And that's their little drawing they're going to make of their place in Providence. And that's because of the way they were mocked in the press. After all these years of kind of being respected and in a way idealized, this article, I don't know who in particular wrote it, is called Cupid Breaks Up Trio of Artists. And it says, the wedding at the Chateau on the Gresham, attended by two girl artists. And there's that Red Rose Girls. Well, Elizabeth Shippen Green alone was like 40 years old by then. So there's a kind of mockery about the old maids who are living together, losing one of their own, and a kind of what seems to me to be a kind of fantasy about making this bond, this life bond. We will always be together. We will never break this. They weren't naive like that. These were smart business women, and they pick up here that they're being mocked. And if you look at Violet Oakley here, looks like she is some kind of a mutant. They've really played with these photographs a little bit and made them look terrible. And it's really quite a hostile article after so many positive ones. At any rate, off they go. And they seem to have had a good relationship. They collaborated together on this alliterative alphabet, which was one of their projects that they did. He wrote articles about various things. He's kind of an architecture critic too. Well, the financial problem is solved when Edwin Abbey dies and can no longer complete the Capitol rooms that are unfinished. And in December, they award this to Violet Oakley. And the New York Times publishes an entire full page on the subject. And at this point, they really have stopped talking about the other women artists. And Violet Oakley is in a kind of level of her own. You can see all her work. Some of this is at Woodmere now. It's a very long article about her. And this is making tension between the two of them. But Violet Oakley will deal with the gender issue straight on. And you see this quote when she's interviewed. She says, they ask her about these feminine qualities. She says that in art, the sex distinction is lost, that an artist puts in his work is essentially human. She believes in the equality of the sexes and does not think her work would have been materially different had she not been the woman she is. So I think she deserves a lot of credit for trying to explode that idea. So they're really quite ahead of their time. I mean, we're still trying to do this now. And there are men now who are kind of buying this idea when they see what she does. And it's kind of breaking these stereotypes down. Joseph Jackson, the Public Ledger, says the thinker is dominant in everything she does, and that her work is on a level that many men would shrink from. And there you can see one of her murals and how enormous it is. So she's breaking down that barrier. Now, but what is going to break down is that at this point, she no longer wants to live with, now that Elizabeth's gone, she doesn't want to live with Jessie and Henrietta. She wants to buy, with the money she gets advanced to her from the state capitol. She wants to buy Cogslea for herself, the whole thing, and have the barn transformed for her mural paintings. And she basically, it's like a hostile takeover. And she does this, and it really makes a rift with Jessie and Henrietta. They decide they will, Jessie has plenty of money too, Now, she'd buy a piece of the land from the Woodwards on the corner of St. George's Road, and she will build a house for the two of them, designed by Edmund Gilchrist. And that will be called Codd's Hill, but that house won't be constructed for a couple of years. So Violet Oakley is kind of burning her bridges here. And she does seem to want a partner of her own. But it's not Elizabeth Shippen Green, that's for sure. And in 1913, she's hired at the academy to teach, and she starts having students. And one of them is in Chicago, named Edith Emerson. His father's an archaeologist. And as she told me herself, when I saw Violet Oakley, I just said, I'm going to go to Philadelphia and study with her. And it was absolutely clear to me that she just fell in love with her. And I don't want to say like a groupie, but a little bit, she went after her. She pursued her. And then when she was in her class, she realized Violet Oakley loved Renaissance art and Italian art. She dressed as a boy and called herself Giovanni and wrote her Italian love letters and offered herself as an apprentice. And she won the heart of Violet Oakley. And the two of them, as we know, would live together after Violet Oakley's mother died. And she invited her to live with her then in 1918. And they lived together. And there's one of her pictures of Edith. The Red Roses did reconcile in the end, and they all kind of became friends and let bygones be bygones. But that's, they had a bumpy, there were some weeds in that garden for a while. But at any rate, they pretty much conquered the art world on their own. And I think that they're endlessly worth our respect. They were also all accepted into the Illustrators Hall of Fame. They were inaugurated into the Society of Illustrators. And for a long time, they became really important role models for women. Now, in our current kind of culture wars, I think they continue to have real relevance. So thank you for your attention. I might have run out the clock here, but.
Yeah, thank you so much, Patricia. That was fantastic. And thank you everyone so much for being here with us. We're going to go over just a minute or two for a question or comment from folks. We've had some great resources dropped in the chat, a lot of questions specifically about relations and things. I wanted to make sure we had, one of our first questions was asking about specific stained glass windows. And I did want to mention that Dr. Anna O'Marley dropped a resource to some stained glass windows we have permanently on view at PAFA. But someone asked if Violet's stained glass windows survived in the ballroom of the Maybrook Mansion, or just in general, kind of there aren't too many left, I've heard.
That's a mystery. They were removed, but we don't know where they are. And I think Bill Valerio was kind of trying to chase them down. But I actually don't know where they are. A lot of them have been removed and they've been destroyed in the process because often people just don't know what they're doing and they kind of pull them apart. So almost all her stained glass is gone. It fell, it broke, sad story, vulnerable material. But
that's awful.
Sorry, I have nothing happier to report.
No, well, I'm just happy so much of her work did survive and that you can see it on view at PAFA and other institutions like Woodmere. And I also wanted to say, it's amazing to have so many members of the Plastic Club here with us today. Thank you all for showing up, and it's great to celebrate that huge anniversary and how this exhibition tied into that. We had someone that asked if Edith Emerson was related to Ralph Waldo Emerson.
No, not that we've ever been able to establish. I'm sure she would have bragged about it if it had been the case. No, she came from very distinguished family of scholars, though. Her father was an classical archaeologist at Cornell. Her brother was one of the leading biologist studying social insects like termites. Her sister Gertrude moved to India and was the editor of Asia magazine. So she came from a really illustrious family. And Violet Oakley, when the two of them kind of hooked up, they met all the family members. Violet Oakley would talk to her father. Everybody seemed to, accept the fact that that was the relationship that they had. They were partners.
Yeah, no, completely. Thank you for that. We have an earlier question too that was asking if you have seen the article that's attributed to Life Was Made for Fun and Cheer, or if you knew where someone could get a reference to that to learn more about.
I'm going to look for that because I originally thought it was just an illustration, and then I read that it was a part of an article. And you can retrieve practically anything from Harper's. It's somewhere, even Google Books. So I would like to, find that out. So whoever that is can email me. And if I locate it, I'll send you the reference.
Thank you. That's wonderful. And then I think last but not least, someone asked, and I've actually seen somebody on the call that does tours at cemeteries, but if you know the final resting place of any of the three main women, and if any of them are in Laurel Hill or somewhere else in Pennsylvania.
That's a good question. I know Violet Oakley ended up back in New York with her family and not with Edith. So they were separated. And I don't know, Elizabeth Shippen Green, I would think, she was married. I don't know where she went, but I would think Jessie Willcox Smith is local. Again, I can check that out. I don't mind if you let people have my email address. I like to hear from people. So if somebody has a question, I can answer it. Feel free to contact me. Keeps me thinking.
Yeah, no, of course. And if anybody wants to reach out to Patricia through her Elizabethtown College email, you're listed there, or you can also always contact me and I'm happy to connect you and drop you here. But with that, we're going to have to say goodbye. Thank you all so much for being here, and a huge round of applause for Dr. Ricci. It was wonderful learning more about these amazing women's lives. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you for tuning in.
All right. Take care, everyone.